Okay. Hey, Ellie. So I actually watched this game beforehand, so I kind of have an idea of what happens. And I feel like some of the games like this, where it's absolute chaos, are probably some of the hardest to review. But there's still some mistakes in here that I think we can go through that might be relevant. There's a couple of things early game which I feel like the game's completely different when there were mechanical mistakes, and I think you're kind of aware of them as well, but we can still cover that. Uh, but you mentioned that you kind of want to focus on the mid game, so I think for a lot of the early game we can skip through some stuff and then kind of cover the more relevant macro mistakes. So yeah, I've already seen the draft, so we can go ahead and skip this as well as the initial clear. Um, a bit slow. Okay, so this is the first part I can talk about. So generally on ganks like this, for a lot of champions, it's pretty low value because all of the laners are basically full HP. There's no slow push that the enemy needs to crash, and there's no dive or anything. But I think on Lee Sin, the gank that you do here is actually fine, just because even chucking out this guy really heavily is pretty advantageous for your laner. Other, junglers don't have as much of the same luxury, and this would be definitely considered a very low quality gank. But watch, um, and yeah, it turns out absolutely fine. It's a bit unfortunate that the Anivia took, a huge chunk here. And now when you're thinking about this position, there's kind of two options that you have, right? One is that you push the wave to go for a dive, and then the other one, if you're expecting Vi to come here, is to counter gank, right? So obviously the dive is not a good idea because we just saw Vi and we know that, she'll be there. So when you push, it kind of signals right away that, the Vi just needs to stand behind the tower to go for the dive. So the only thing here to talk about is the counter gank. Because you were thinking about counter ganking, you don't really want to be standing here, right? You want to be standing lower to this bush around this area, and then Nivea can kind of hover near you so that when Vi comes, it's basically a free kill, right? Versus like if you watch when the Vi does come, you end up having to spend way too much time. You flash and everything just to catch up, and she dies anyways. Uh, which I think you already knew, but just in case we're covering it. Um, cool. So you scuttle. Uh, get a kill here. Again, here I think this easily goes like both of them die potentially, but it's a small micro mistake, but it's fine. Uh, recall. Continue clear. Again, a super relevant thing to be doing as you're clearing camps is to maybe be thinking about where Vi is and communicating that to your team. Uh, right. So this is the first part in the early game where I think, we might have helpful tools, or I can talk about some helpful tools for how you could review or think about your game. So uh, the earlier mistakes were basically just micro, so it's usually not that useful. But here you have a really useful tool for how you should be thinking about other options that you have in the game. So right after you do your Raptors, you go for the Grom, right? So this could actually be a potential mistake that you could see in your review. I feel like in a lot of the times the crab is actually a bait when there might be more relevant things on the lane or happening in the lanes, right? So over here you saw that the Vi ganked mid, and then she instantly went bot. And at the same time, your bot lane has a slow push going down to their tower, right? To the enemy tower. So these kind of points in the game are key intervals where you can look at what could I have done instead. And the rule that I generally follow is to look at what happens around 28 seconds from now. So the reason I say 28 seconds is because generally it'll take you 8 seconds to recall and 20 seconds from the nexus to come back to be active on the map, right? Around the river area. So here we do crab, or we do raptors followed by crab, and our bot lane is trying to crash. So we kind of get lucky here, and the Vi makes a mistake, of going for the dragon, when instead, one option she had against your no summoner's bot is to think of some creative gank angle to prevent their crash and then get a double kill. It didn't happen in this game, but it's something that definitely can happen, right? As an example, something I found in my own reviews is I would int the game by going for crab on my first rotation. And basically what happened is that I would full clear down, the crab is up, I would go for it, and at the about a little bit after the crab is finished, my top laner gets ganked. And then he dies, and there's a huge wave in front of the tower, and it's basically GG for the top lane, right? So when you use the 28-second rule, what you can do in your review is where could I have been, right? And what you'll kind of find a lot of the time, especially in the example that I'm giving you, it's a bit theoretical, so you'll kind of have to see it for yourself, is you'll find a lot of the time when you don't go for the crab, you instantly recall and move upward for the counter gank. You're basically there at the exact time that the enemy jungler might come and gank you later. So that's just something you can do for your future self reviews. Let's continue. This was a gank I really did like. Uh, Basically, it's the same as kind of what I was saying for mid lane, except it's a bit worse. Because for mid lane, it's still kind of worth it if you chuck out the Talia, right? And maybe you get a flash. But here you basically have a full HP, full mana Scion. The wave is in a position that, it's nowhere close to the tower. So this is, if you were to consider the different levels of ganks, like this is one of the lowest value, right? With the highest value is basically you have a slow push to the enemy tower and then you dive them, right? Because then you're not only getting the 300 gold from killing the laner, but you're also denying them a ton of golden XP on a slow push stacked wave. But yeah, let's continue. Uh, yeah, you end up blaming the Lord here, but I think the gank was still not that great. Um, Though it does change with, yeah, Mordekaiser, chunks him low and then with his R, and then you just clean up, right? Um, let's see. Continue. This was another place where, yeah, mechanical mistake. I think you could have easily gone 3 for 1 here by just saving your R using the Q, but that's not that important. Yeah, and then we just have more things happen on the map. So this herald is actually fine. Another time I said that in another review I mentioned that you kind of want to go for the full turret, but I think in this game with the current conditions, it's going to be really hard for you to use this Rift Herald to take down, let's say, all of bot tower, right? It's possible on top tower, but it's not really possible for you to, in the 2 minutes, I think, push out the wave, kill the laners, take all 4 plates. So this is probably fine. Yeah, this was another part where I think there's just mechanical mistakes that slightly changed the outcome. Yeah, let's just skip through the rest of, I think, the early game and go to the mid-game stuff for macro. Because there were some key points that I thought were much more important than anything in the early game. Going. I think this was a 4 versus 3? Yeah, it was. But then you guys just outplayed them really hard. Yeah. This Rift was a mistake, but I think it's hard to say, right? Because over here, the enemy kind of has to assume that you're doing Rift Herald, and a lot of the time you can actually sneak it in with them being completely unaware. So I don't want to criticize the Rift Herald that much, because it is like even if the conditions for doing Rift Herald aren't really met, there are a lot of times that you can just like sneak in these objectives, right? and the enemy is clueless that you're even doing them. Let's skip ahead to I think when you tried bear because I think that was kind of the game losing play. Right? Okay, okay, it's right here. It's right here. So from this position, you guys start bearing, and this is probably the biggest mistake in the game. And I'm not saying that just because of the results, but more of the conditions, right? So over here, you don't really have any vision setup or any preemptive planning made to start this bear, right? So typically, what you'll want to do a lot of the time, if you want to get bared, is you want to get mid push and you want to get top push, right? And the reason for that, when you do objectives, is basically it changes the routes that the enemy can take, right? So the reason people actually push these lanes is, well, one is it gives them options for future plays. Like let's say you push out the lane and then you can threaten a tower, right? Or you team fight and then you threaten a tower. But also it has to do with the vision that is granted to you, right? So when you push out this mid wave and the top wave, basically you get vision along this entire area, and it's very easy to see when the enemy is coming, right? So the enemy typically, when they have this push, cannot walk in through these bushes in the mid lane, and they can't walk in through the top, right? It's a bit more relevant towards the mid lane and less relevant towards the bot lane, just because there's a lot of bushes here, right? Which your entire team can be sitting in. Um, so that's part of the issue with the setup. And then part two is that you guys don't really have any vision set up here at all, right? So you have a pick, but typically what you'll want to do is after you get a push in mid lane and top lane, your team goes together to set up vision along this line, right? And basically what that allows you to do is to threaten doing the Baron or be sitting in the bush, right? And the enemy team doesn't know. So they have to come up, go in blind, and sweep your vision before they can, try and run straight to the Baron, right? And I think there's some really good support guides on Skill Capped that I would recommend for this because they go really in depth into how to set up objectives, right? So this was probably how does this fight actually go? Okay, yeah, you guys lose it. And see, it's like it gets so screwed, right? Because your team's all back here, you're afraid of the Talia, and the Rakan solo goes in and dies, and then it's basically GG, right? But then I think we compound on these mistakes even harder. If we keep going. Uh, so here we're trying to fight, the dragon, right? And generally, this is actually not that bad. So what'll typically happen when the enemy takes Baron and your team is has maybe like a tempo lead because you died early and then it's gonna take them a while to do Baron, is that because they just won this huge team fight, they want to spend their gold. They're typically gonna recall, right? So then if all of your teammates are here, a lot of the time you can run straight to Dragon, and then you set up that same vision line, right? Like the one that we talked about in Baron. And then again, even though the enemy team has Baron, they're still walking in to a disadvantageous fight because they're going to have to walk into your vision line, right? But in this case, you guys coming here is a mistake because one, the Vi actually ran straight here, which I think is a mistake from him, but it is what it is. And then two, your Mordekaiser's dead, right? So no matter how this goes, even if you do set up your vision line, you're going to be fighting a 5 vs 4. I personally feel like Dragon a lot of the time, even if it is soul point, is totally bait. Like the only times you really want to take it is if it's super free, right? And there's going to be lots of situations in the game that come up where it is super free. Even giving up soul in a lot of games is totally fine. Like you can give up soul and ultimately win the game, right? Because what matters not is like, stacking these dragons so much as exploding the Nexus, right? So if you get like, if in the time that the enemy team does soul, your team says, okay, screw it, and you just push down mid and top, they don't really have any plays after, right? And you usually do. get towers in exchange. Let's watch this. Yeah, we still end up fighting this 5v4. No, no advantage here, and then you guys basically die, right? So the game's now even harder. They still have Baron, and I think there was one other main thing I kind of want to cover in terms of macro. Um, when we were playing the mid game, I think it's when you kill the Scion. Right? Yeah, yeah, it's right around here. So for some reason, your team is entirely allergic to pushing waves. And we saw that earlier when, you guys went for the dragon, when instead it was actually, let me just go back. Let me just go back. When you did the dragon here, right? So over here, for the enemy team, the dragon is actually less important than just pushing down these towers, right? Because they want to go for the most aggressive play that they can. So for them, the best move, realistically, is to not even go for this dragon and instantly push down top and mid. Because the Baron buff isn't really for objective control, right? I mean, it is, but for a different reason. It's not. Sorry, let me reword that. It's not really for team fighting, right? It's for sieging. So because they have a limited timer, they want to use their Baron buff as efficiently as they can, and then retreat to safer objectives, right? It's a similar concept to when you're going for early game jungling. If we see a crab, if we're doing an invade and we see a crab, we typically want to take the camps first and then retreat to the safer crab, right? And the same concept applies here. Where in mid-game macro, you typically want to take the more aggressive play that you can and then retreat to the safer objective. So for the enemy team, taking the towers is actually the more aggressive play, right? Um, yeah, because once they push these towers and take them down, your team can't contest Dragon anyways, right? Because you're gonna have top lane pushed in, you're gonna have mid lane pushed in, and your entire team is busy catching waves. If you go for this Dragon and they just push instead, this Dragon is totally a fine trade for them because they're gonna get 600 gold on top, they're gonna get 300 gold here. They're potentially gonna get mid tower as well, right? So it's just uh I want to say almost it feels impossible to come back, right? And all you got in return was just one ocean drag. Let's keep going. Let's go to the part where you kill the Scion. Right, right. So here, you got this kill on Scion, but I would say it's basically not worth. Because at this point of the game, the only reason you really want kills is because it lets you do something else, right? Um, so what that means is instead of just going for random kills, what you usually want to do is push out your waves and then look for a play. And you could push the wave all the way out to the tier two, but if you want to just have the wave pushing on its own, typically what you need to do is just push it past this middle river point, and then it's going to go in towards the enemy tower on its own, and then someone's going to have to go and collect it. And using that side lane tempo advantage, that's when you look for plays, right? Because when you have these pushed waves and you kill somebody, the idea is that now you can take something else, right? But instead, we kill this Scion, we use our flash for it, and in return, we're basically going to get nothing. All we can do in this time is push out these waves in preparation for the dragon fight or maybe the Baron fight, but nothing else, right? Um, and even then, I think because the timer's so long and this guy's going to respawn in 40 seconds, the enemy team still has time to, counterbalance that push that you have, right? Um, I hope I explained that well. Is just that pushing waves in the mid game is actually super super important, and I think I'll leave it at that for this review.